Alexander Xander Hawthorne was a man who had everything: money, power, and an empire built on ruthless ambition. As the CEO of Hawthorne Industries, he was used to making calculated decisions, never letting emotions interfere with business. But 4 years ago, on a rare night of vulnerability, he let himself slip. That night at a charity gala, he met Olivia Reed, a woman who was as breathtakingly beautiful as she was refreshingly real. She wasn't from his world of wealth and corporate dominance. She was a hardworking law student, independent, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by his billionaire status. They had talked for hours, something about her drawing him in like no one ever had before. No pretense, no games, just raw, electric chemistry. By the end of the night, when she had whispered his name and pulled him toward her, he didn't resist. That one night had been unlike anything he had ever experienced. But by morning she was gone, leaving nothing behind except the memory of her touch and the feeling that, for once in his life, he had lost control. Xander searched for her, but Olivia had disappeared without a trace. He convinced himself it was for the best. No attachments, no complications, and yet, for years, he never forgot her. 4 years had passed since that unforgettable night, but for Xander Hawthorne, the memory of Olivia Reed never truly faded. He had convinced himself that their night together was just a fleeting moment, a beautiful yet meaningless mistake. He had moved on, or so he thought, but fate had other plans. One afternoon, after an intense board meeting, Xander decided to grab coffee from a cafe near his corporate office. It was an ordinary day, another moment in his meticulously controlled life. But just as he stepped out of the cafe with his espresso in hand, everything changed. A laughter, small, playful, and oddly familiar, echoed from the sidewalk. His gaze drifted toward the sound, and that's when he saw her. Olivia. She looked exactly as he remembered, same captivating eyes, same gentle strength in her posture. But she wasn't alone. 2 little boys stood beside her, each clutching a tiny cup of juice. Identical. Dark hair, piercing blue eyes, eyes that looked exactly like his. Xander froze. The world around him blurred. His grip tightened around his coffee cup, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because there, right in front of him, were 2 children who looked exactly like him. Olivia was laughing at something one of them said, completely unaware of his presence. The sight of her so effortlessly happy, so completely immersed in her life, struck something deep inside him. But Xander was a man of logic, a man who never let emotions get the best of him. So, why did it feel like the ground beneath him was shifting? Why did it feel like his entire world had just been turned upside down? Forcing himself to move, he took a step forward. Olivia, her name left his lips like a whisper. But it was enough. She stiffened. Her laughter faded. Slowly, as if dreading what she would see, she turned to face him. Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, he saw fear in hers. Not fear of him, but fear of what he had just discovered. Because now there was no running. Olivia's breath caught in her throat the moment she locked eyes with him. Xander, the man she had spent 4 years trying to forget, the man who unknowingly fathered her twins. Her entire body froze, her fingers tightening around the small hands of her sons. She saw the recognition, the shock, the fury flashing in his stormy blue eyes as he looked from her to the 2 little boys beside her. Xander took another step forward, his voice low and controlled, but dangerously intense. "Are they mine?" Olivia's throat went dry. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, what she would say, how she would defend her choices. But now that it was happening, her mind was blank. She started, but she had no answer that would satisfy him, because there was no denying the truth. The boys were his spitting image, same dark, tousled hair, same piercing blue eyes, same stubborn tilt of the chin that she had seen on Xander himself that one night. Xander's gaze flickered down to the twins, who were now staring up at him with innocent curiosity. They didn't know him. They didn't know that the man standing in front of them was their father. His stomach tightened, a feeling he didn't recognize, one that felt dangerously close to panic, rose in his chest. He turned back to Olivia, his voice laced with a quiet betrayal. You had my children and never told me? Olivia swallowed hard. It's not that simple. His eyes darkened. It is that simple. You kept my sons from me. His sons. The words sent a chill down her spine. She had always known this day would come, that somehow, someway, Xander Hawthorne would find out about the twins. She had just never expected it to happen like this. Xander, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, not here. She could feel the eyes of bystanders, the growing curiosity of the twins as they looked between her and this stranger. Xander exhaled sharply, clearly fighting to keep his emotions in check. Then where? He demanded. Because I'm not walking away without answers. Olivia knew there was no escape. Not anymore. She nodded reluctantly. There's a park nearby. We can talk there. Xander's jaw was still clenched, but after a moment he nodded. She turned to the twins, forcing a gentle smile. Boys, we're going to the park for a little bit, okay? The two little boys grinned, completely unaware of the storm brewing between the adults. Xander watched them, watched Olivia, and for the first time in his life, he felt completely unprepared for what came next. Because no matter what happened, nothing would ever be the same again. The walk to the park was silent. Xander stayed close, his sharp gaze fixed on Olivia, and the two little boys running ahead, laughing and playing, his sons. Every time he heard their laughter, something inside him twisted. He was a man who thrived on control, who made calculated decisions in every aspect of his life. But nothing had prepared him for this. For years, and he had never known they existed. Once they reached a quiet bench under a large oak tree, Olivia turned to the boys and forced a smile. Why don't you two go play on the swings for a bit? The twins nodded excitedly and ran toward the playground, completely unaware of the storm raging between their parents. Xander crossed his arms, his jaw tight. Talk! Olivia took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She owed him this conversation. I didn't keep them from you out of spite, she said carefully. I found out I was pregnant after that night, but by the time I worked up the courage to reach out to you, you were gone. Xander's brows furrowed. Gone. I tried to contact you, she admitted, but you were traveling constantly, impossible to reach. Your assistant refused to connect me to you, and I didn't exactly have access to your world. Xander's fists clenched at his sides. You should have tried harder. Olivia's anger flared. Tried harder? Xander, you're a billionaire. Your world is locked behind security assistants and people who filter every message you get. You don't even have social media. I was a broke law student. I didn't have the means to just waltz into your corporate empire and demand a meeting. His expression darkened, but he couldn't argue with her. Because she was right. If she had tried to reach him back then, chances were that he never would have known. His life had been an endless stream of business deals, jet-setting across the world, drowning himself in work to forget the woman who had disappeared after one night. Why didn't you try again later? He pressed. Why not after they were born? Olivia looked away. Because by then, I convinced myself you didn't want to know. Xander's chest tightened. I had spent months trying to track you down, Xander, she said, her voice quieter now. And then I saw an article about you being the ruthless billionaire who never wanted family. I figured if you didn't want kids, what was the point of telling you? His stomach dropped. He knew exactly what article she was referring to. A business journalist had once labeled him as a man who prioritized wealth over everything else, a CEO too cold and ambitious to be burdened by things like marriage and family. He had brushed it off at the time, but now he saw how much damage those words had done. Damn it, Olivia, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. That wasn't true. She sighed. I know that now. But back then, I was scared. I was alone. And I convinced myself that the best thing I could do was raise them myself. Xander felt something crack inside him. For years of missed birthdays. For years of not knowing his own children existed. For years that he could never get back. His voice was low, rough. I deserve to know, Olivia. She flinched. I know. He exhaled sharply, staring toward the playground, watching the twins climb onto the swings. Their sons, his sons. The reality of it finally settled deep in his chest. They weren't just two little boys running around. They were his flesh and blood. And now, there was no going back. Everything had changed, and he wasn't going to let them go. Xander had spent years believing he was in full control of his life. Every business deal, every decision, every move he made was calculated, meticulously planned for success. But standing there, watching his sons play on the swings, he realized he had lost control of the most important thing of all, his family. For 4 years, he had unknowingly lived without them. He hadn't been there for their first steps, their first words. He hadn't tucked them in at night or kissed their scraped knees when they fell. And now that he knew about them, there was no way in hell he was going to let them go. He turned to Olivia, his voice low but firm. "I want them in my life." Olivia swallowed, her fingers curling into fists. "Xander, I'm not walking away from them," he interrupted. "I missed 4 years already. I won't miss another second." Her breath hitched. She had expected anger, resentment, but she hadn't expected this level of certainty. "You don't even know them," she said softly. "Then I'll change that." His jaw clenched. "I'll make up for every second I lost?" Olivia's heart ached. She had spent 4 years protecting her boys, convincing herself that they didn't need a father. But Xander wasn't just some absent, uncaring man. He wasn't running. He was fighting for them, for her. That was the most terrifying part of all. Xander took a deep breath. "Let's be clear, I'm not some weekend dad who's going to drop by for birthdays and holidays. I want to be a father to them, Olivia, full-time." Her stomach twisted. She had raised them alone. She had been the one to comfort them when they cried, to read them bedtime stories, to take them to doctor's appointments. The thought of sharing them, of losing even a fraction of what she had, scared her. But when she looked at Xander, she saw the raw emotion in his eyes. The pain of realizing what he had missed, the determination to be in their lives, and most of all, the love he was already feeling for children he had only just met. She hesitated. "What are you suggesting?" Xander's gaze didn't waver. "We do this together." Olivia's heart pounded. "Together? You want joint custody?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Xander shook his head. "I want more than that. I want to know them. I want to co-parent. I want to be at their school plays, their soccer games. I want to take them to the office and show them what I do. I want them to know who I am." She inhaled sharply. This wasn't a man asking for visitation rights. This was a man asking to be a father in every sense of the word. And part of her, the part that had never truly stopped caring for him, wanted to let him. But could she trust him with their hearts? Could she trust him with hers? Xander could see the war raging inside her. "I know you're scared," he said quietly. "And I know I don't deserve your trust yet. But I swear to you, Olivia, I'm not walking away." She stared at him, her throat tightening. For years, she had told herself that she and the boys were enough. But now, as she looked at the man who had unknowingly fathered them, she realized something. Maybe they deserved more. Maybe her boys deserved their father. Maybe she deserved a second chance, too. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments. Olivia had spent 4 years raising the twins alone, building a world where Xander Hawthorne didn't exist. Now, suddenly, he was everywhere. True to his word, Xander didn't hesitate. He wanted to be in their lives, and he made it happen. He showed up at their preschool, meeting the teachers, learning their schedules. He took them out on afternoons, introducing them to a world Olivia had worked hard to keep them away from. Private jets, chauffeured cars, lavish homes. But what surprised Olivia the most was how Xander didn't just throw money at the situation. He was present. He read them bedtime stories. He learned what foods they liked. He sat on the floor with them, building Lego towers and listening to their stories about superheroes and dinosaurs. And the twins? They adored him. It didn't take long for them to warm up to the man who was suddenly a part of their world. One night, after a long day of adjusting to this new arrangement, Olivia heard one of her sons, Theo, sleepily mumbling something as she tucked him in. "Night, Mommy," he yawned. Then, with a tiny drowsy smile, "Night, Daddy." Olivia's breath caught. Xander froze. Theo didn't even realize what he had said. He simply turned over and fell asleep. Xander sat there in silence, staring at his son as though those two little words had shattered him. And for the first time, Olivia saw true vulnerability in him. Their co-parenting arrangement was working, but the more time they spent together, the harder it became to ignore the past. One evening, after the twins had fallen asleep at her house, Olivia stepped into the kitchen only to find Xander standing there, making himself a coffee like he had done it 100 times before. For a moment, it felt like nothing had changed, like they were just two people who belonged together. Olivia swallowed hard. "You don't have to stay." Xander turned, leaning against the counter, his eyes unreadable. "Do you want me to leave?" She opened her mouth to say yes, to tell him that he was still the same ruthless billionaire she had walked away from 4 years ago. But she hesitated, because he wasn't. She had seen the way he tucked their sons into bed, the way he showed up every time they needed him, the way he looked at her, not with arrogance, but with something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to longing. Xander took a step closer, close enough to make her heart race. "I never stopped thinking about you, Olivia," he murmured. Her throat tightened. This wasn't part of the deal. They were supposed to co-parent, not fall for each other again. But as Xander reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, Olivia realized something terrifying. Maybe she had never stopped loving him. Olivia had spent 4 years telling herself she had moved on. That night with Xander had been a mistake, a beautiful, unforgettable mistake that had given her the two greatest joys of her life, her sons. But nothing more. At least, that was what she had convinced herself. But now as she stood in her kitchen, Xander only inches away, his fingers brushing against her cheek, she felt herself unraveling. Everything she had locked away, every feeling she had buried, came rushing back. Xander wasn't the same man she had left behind. He was still powerful, still confident, still a man who walked into a room and commanded attention. But now, she had seen him cradle their sons in his arms. She had seen him worry, struggle, soften. He wasn't just a ruthless billionaire anymore. He was a father. And the worst part, he was still the only man who had ever made her heart race like this. Xander saw the war in her eyes, the way she fought against whatever it was they had always shared. But he was done pretending. "I know you still feel it," he said quietly. Whatever this is between us." Olivia swallowed. "Xander, I don't want to fight anymore," he interrupted, his voice raw with emotion. "I don't want to be just a father to them. I want to be here, with you, for all of us." Her chest tightened. "Do you really mean that?" she whispered. He exhaled slowly, then reached for her hand, pressing it against his heart. "I've spent my life chasing the wrong things, Olivia," he murmured, "but nothing has ever mattered to me more than you and our sons." Tears pricked at her eyes. She had spent years telling herself he didn't deserve to know them. But the truth was, maybe she had been scared that he still had the power to break her. And yet, here he was, not demanding, not controlling, not taking, just asking for a second chance. And for the first time in a long time, Olivia let herself believe in it. In him, she stepped forward, resting her forehead against his, letting the walls she had built crumble. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "So am I," Xander whispered. "But I don't want to run anymore. I want to build something real. With you?" Olivia took a shaky breath. Then, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was 4 years overdue. It was gentle, uncertain, yet filled with everything they had both been too afraid to say. And in that moment, Olivia knew this wasn't just a reunion. This was a beginning. 1 year later, the world finally knew the truth. Xander Hawthorne was no longer just a billionaire CEO. He was a father, a partner, a man who had fought for his family and won. The media had gone into a frenzy when the news broke, not just about the twins, but about his relationship with Olivia. Billionaire Xander Hawthorne reunites with a love he never forgot. Secret twins? Hawthorne's hidden family finally revealed. But for once, Xander didn't care what the world thought. He had everything he had ever wanted. A home filled with laughter and love, Two little boys who ran into his arms every night yelling "Daddy" as he lifted them up, and Olivia, the woman who had once walked away, but had chosen to stay. As he stood in their backyard, watching the sunset while Olivia played with the twins, Xander wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. She sighed, leaning into him. "You're not going to get all sentimental on me now, are you?" Xander chuckled. "Too late." Olivia turned at his arms, smiling up at him. "So, forever?" she asked. He cupped her face, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Forever. And with that, Xander Hawthorne finally had it all.